What's Melvin, y'all? This is Prince Infinite from Hog Mob Ministries. I'm just here to tell you a little quick version of my testimony and a small portion of where I came from and how I grew up. So, initially, my life started off in the hospital for like the first 5 years, being premature. But I was born and raised in Vineland, New Jersey, southern New Jersey. Now, Vineland isn't known for its street gangs and like major Bloods, Crips, and all of that stuff. We do have gang violence. We do have, different types of criminality things going on, but it ain't like the major metropolitan city. Now that being said, I kind of grew up in a broken home. My mother, as much as she tried to do the best to raise me, she made a lot of wrong choices in her relationship, which caused a lot of problems within our household. And one of them was choosing a man to be in her life that was very abusive, very narcissistic. The guy had a lot of demons he was dealing with. So my household was not a great place to be. It wasn't a place that any kid would have loved to grow up. And honestly, I don't have any good memories as a kid. Um, so by the age of 11, with all the abuse, and I'm not just talking about physical abuse, there was physical, verbal, emotional, and sexual abuse going on in the house between him doing things to my sister, my mother, and even myself. So by that time, I was I was the type of kid that was real scared. I was the type of kid that I was scared to open the refrigerator because I really thought that I was gonna get smacked just for opening it up. Um, so it was a lot of things going on. But when my sister turned 13, she ended up getting pregnant by him, and ended up Dyfus ended up taking her out of the house, and that's when my fear started to become anger. Um, my sister was my rock. My sister was my everything. You know, she protected me as a little kid. She did a lot of things for me that maybe my mother should have done, but again, my mother just made a lot of wrong choices. So when she left, I was alone. The only thing I had were walking home from school and walking to the bus stop in the morning, were the guys on the corner hustling, were the guys on the corner that were making money and had this persona that they was, um, bigger than the world. And I kind of like took a latch to all that. Like I wanted to be that, you know. And I kind of looked at them more like role models than anything I was seeing in my own home. So at the end of the day, me and a couple of the guys, after getting to know me a while and hanging out with me, you know, I felt comfortable enough to tell them what was going on in the household. Not in full detail, but just enough to the point where we decided to go on Christmas morning and break into my mom's boyfriend's home, destroy his house, and then wait for him to come home so that we can go ahead and basically take him out. Um, when he got there that night, uh, we decided, he seen me. He kept asking, like, what happened, this, that, and the third. And I went specifically started walking up to him so he could pay his attention on me and not anybody else. And the other guys came up and we jumped him. And I mean, it was pretty bad. And it was bad enough to get myself locked up. But the one thing that I think hurt the worst was that my mother was so scared of this man that when it came down to it, She didn't defend me, she defended him. And I became this problem child. So I was sentenced to 2.5 years as a juvenile. Um, and I went to, Skillman at that time. So when other kids were actually playing video games, I was doing time in jail. But I didn't take it as I was doing time. I was around people that I thought loved me and cared for me, and I got to know people around the state, other kids, um, that had that same thing that I was looking for, not realizing there was a core foundation of fear and all these other things going on. But we just had to put up this facade that we was harder than all that. So when I came home, immediately I was drawn to the streets. Immediately, I went to go live with my father, um, and living with my father was straight freedom. My father wasn't as strict as my mother, and definitely not as strict as the guy who so-called was my stepfather. Um, so I was always out and about, uh, and I was drawn more to the streets. And I was introduced to the Latin Kings inside Skillman, but when I came home, there had maybe been like two or three guys, older guys, that were actual Latin Kings. And one of them was Youngblood. He was the first one that actually brought me in to the Latin Kings as a Pee Wee King. And he started giving me lessons. He started, basically molding me into be what he wanted me to be. Um, so I became a Pee Wee King. And throughout my juvenile years, I was in and out. So between going to Skillman, Jamesburg, Epson, I was automatically connecting with other Latin Kings around the state. And we went ahead and we ended up forming a bond, a real brotherhood, for me anyway, um, that I was willing to die for these guys. And I heard all kinds of stories of who King Blood was, and man, it was like a goal of ours as juveniles to want to be a full-fledged Latin King. So when I became 18, I went to New York in the Bronx, and I got crowned um, under the Lion Tribe and became a full-fledged Latin King. Immediately, right after that, I went to prison. Was facing a life sentence. Ended up doing a total of 10 years before was able to come home. When I came home, though, in them 10 years, all I did was just grow in the nation. I wanted to be the next King Blood. I didn't want to just be um, a gang member. I didn't just want to be a drug dealer. I didn't want to be a kingpin. I wanted to be the next best thing to King Blood. At that time, he was already doing life in prison. He wasn't coming home. Other people had stepped up, but in my head, I'm a different type of king. I'm not just a king as a soldier, but I'm also an educated king. I know my lessons. I know manifestos, not just verbatim, but I actually studied them and inbredded them into my life. So I went ahead and kept pushing forward, pushing forward. And as becoming the first crown and becoming the leader of the Latin Kings, um, there was a lot of responsibilities on my part to show fear and not just to show strength. So I had to do a lot of things that in the pit of my stomach didn't feel right. But as time grew on, I didn't care anymore. I did so many different things that, let's put it this way, I went ahead and put the word demonio, which is demon, on my chest because that's how I felt. It became like a cold-blooded thing. And a lot of times my hands weren't the ones getting dirty, but because I sent other people to do the dirt, I always consider other people's blood on my hands. Um, and that went on for like the next, I want to say, 20 plus years. And it wasn't until my brother died that everything started to change, and I started to see some things different. Didn't happen immediately, but it started. So, I still kept running the streets. I still kept doing what I was doing, going to multiple states, becoming the first Crown, building chapters in Ohio and Connecticut. Wherever I went, I made sure my presence was known, and I made sure that whoever was running it at that time, they were going to answer to me eventually. Um, so I had this God mindset, not knowing that it was God who was actually protecting me all these years to keep me alive because I had a greater purpose. And in 2016, I caught my last bid. I got a 12-year sentence. I went to prison, and it wasn't until like after sitting in there for 90 days. Now, mind you, 12 years ain't nothing. I could have done that standing on my head. Um, but I sat in prison for 90 days and I got put in solitary confinement. While sitting in solitary confinement, I was faced with a task of a hit being put out on my life by another organization. Um, and it was going to happen in the yard the next day. So I didn't care about that. Like, I've dealt with this before. I've been through wars. I've had different types of battles with different prison gangs and things like that. But I was just tired. I was tired of going through the same process over and over. Something had to be different. There was a reason why I kept being spared, and I didn't know why. So that night before, around 9 o'clock, I'm sitting on the edge of my bunk, and something came over me. For the first time ever, I actually dropped to my knees and asked God to no longer be against him, but let me be a part of him. I didn't know exactly how to pray. I didn't know exactly if what I was saying was correct. All I know is I was tired of fighting him and making him my enemy. Um, Earlier that day, a chaplain, prison chaplain, came by and handed me a Bible, and this is how disrespectful I was. I went ahead and threw the Bible underneath the bunk. After I threw it underneath the bunk, that night I seen it in my peripheral, and I grabbed it. I opened it up and I went to the book of Acts. Now, mind you, I'm not going to say some holier than thou thing happened. I fell asleep, didn't read not one word, but it was a start. It was something that God needed me to do because I had never done it before. And it was truly come to a point of surrender. And that's what I had to do. I had to surrender to him. And in all those years, that was probably the most peaceful sleep I ever had in my life. That at 3 o'clock in the morning, a CO comes to my cell, wakes me up, and tells me that I'm getting out of solitary confinement, that I'm going to another prison. Mind you, didn't even read the Bible, didn't know nothing about it, didn't know in the book of Acts that the prison doors opened up, didn't know none of these stories. And all of a sudden, here it is. God literally opened up solitary confinement and prison doors to let me come out, put me in another prison. The riot happened that day. People were hurt, but my life was spared. So much that my life was spared that 10 months passed by, and my 12-year sentence was actually reduced to those 10 months, and I was able to go home and actually serve the rest of my time in prison on the streets. So when I tell you that God could go ahead and use someone like me, someone whose past is so bloody, so traumatic, so desperate, so fearful, that today I live by faith, and now I'm able to go ahead and do street ministry and give life back instead of being that guy who took life. God bless. Keep mobbing.